Hello, welcome everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you all so much for joining us for Sales and Marketing Alignment, How to Synergize for Success, presented by Sales Pro Central and sponsored by ZoomInfo. I'm Tara, the webinar manager of Sales Pro Central, and I am so excited to bring you this brand new session with such well-earned insight into practical steps you can take to unify your sales and marketing teams to ultimately meet your organizational objectives. I am really looking forward to hearing from Carlos Hidalgo today and what I'm sure will be a valuable presentation. As a reminder, we will be recording this webinar in case you have to leave early. We'll be sending it to you by email within 48 hours. And you can also visit the webinar's registration page after today's session to view the recording there as well. We're going to send that link into the chat box right now for you. Up next, before we go any further, I want to thank ZoomInfo for sponsoring this webinar and helping us to make this all happen. ZoomInfo is a leader in modern go-to-market software, data, and intelligence for more than 25,000 companies worldwide. The ZoomInfo platform empowers business-to-business sales, marketing, and recruiting professionals to hit their numbers by pairing best-in-class technology with unrivaled data coverage, accuracy, and depth of company and contact information. With integrations embedded into workflows and technology stacks, including the leading CRM, sales engagement, marketing, automation, and talent management applications, ZoomInfo drives more predictable, accelerated, and sustainable growth for its customers. ZoomInfo emphasizes GDPR and CCPA compliance. For more information about their leading go-to-market software, data and intelligence, and how they help sales, marketing, and recruiting professionals, please visit zoominfo.com. So thank you again to ZoomInfo. Up next, let's go ahead and get some technical things out of the way. Please don't hesitate to ask questions during today's event. You can do so by submitting your questions into the Q&A panel found in the bottom bar of this webinar window. Great questions always make for a great webinar, so don't forget to stick around for the Q&A session near the end of the hour to get even more insights from Carlos. The chat is also open and available for discussion, comments. We always love to see it. Just know we will use the Q&A panel to find your questions so that we don't lose them in the chat. My wonderful colleague, Tori, will be fielding your questions today, and she'll be happy to answer anything technical you might have. So feel free to pull up the chat or the Q&A and say hello to let her know that you're listening. Also, closed captioning is available for this webinar. To enable this feature, select the More button in the bottom bar of this webinar window and select the Captions option. And lastly, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may choose to dial in by phone. All dial-in information can be found in your webinar confirmation email from Zoom. It is on the screen, and Tori can also relay it to you at any point if you need it. Up next, again, today I am very excited to hear from Carlos Hidalgo. Carlos is the co-founder and CEO of Digital Exhaust, a data-driven, AI-enabled consultancy that helps clients make growth simple. Carlos serves his clients as an advisor and consultant to ensure they have meaningful engagement with their customers at every stage of the journey and are able to mature in and create sustainable growth. He has over 30 years of experience working with organizations of all sizes as an advisor, consultant, innovator, and growth expert. He is widely recognized for his expertise in marketing, sales, and customer success, and for coaching executives in the areas of leadership and managing change. Carlos is also the author of Driving Demand, ranked as a top 5 marketing book of all time by Book Authority, and also The Un-American Dream, which was released in 2019. Carlos is also a well-known international keynote and TEDx speaker. We are so grateful to have you here today, Carlos. I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to you to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Tara. It is a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank Sales Pro Central and also ZoomInfo for sponsoring this webinar and for having me. And I want to thank all of you for attending. I know time is precious, and so we're going to get right into it. We've got a lot of information. And as Tara said, I would encourage you all to submit your questions because this webinar is really about you. And my goal is to help give you some things you can walk away with that can help you drive further alignment in your organization. So raise your hand if this vision looks familiar. You've got sales on the left, you've got marketing on the right, sales saying these aren't leads, marketing saying we've driven these leads. Well, here's a startling number, is that 16% is the average marketing sales alignment. And what I mean by that is if you look at the overlap between marketing and sales and how they should be working together, the typical organization only has about 16% of overlap. And so when we think about marketing and sales alignment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why we need to go further than just marketing and sales later in the presentation, that 16% though should concern all of us, because what it means is we're missing out on growth opportunities, and it also means that we're impacting the customer in not so great ways. And so we really need to get that 100% alignment across these organizations. So before we get into all the content, I'm just going to launch a little bit of a poll here and ask you to rate your marketing and sales alignment. So we're going to give just a couple of seconds for you to fill this out. Excellent, good, fair. And then the last one is what's alignment? So if you would take a few seconds, fill out the poll. Tara will give it about another 15 seconds, and then we'll see what the results are. Hopefully it's more than
Absolutely.
16%.
Yeah, yes, I'm seeing a lot of responses coming through. Again, just a few more seconds. Take a second and come to answer this poll that is popping up on your screen. Okay, I mean, these results are, I mean, a little shocking to me, probably not to you, Carlos. I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead and share these results.
Wow, only 3% excellent, or 2% excellent. Um, yeah, it's a challenge, right? And part of that is because we work with people and we all have our different approaches. But what I want to really highlight here is that if you're not in that excellent, you have some work to do. You have some improvement that can be made. I don't want anybody here to lose heart. I don't want you looking at your response and saying, oh my word, it's why you're here. It's why you're choosing to get this education. So one of the things we have to understand is, why is this so difficult? I was joking with Tara before the call. I said the amount of information that's been written, and as she mentioned, I've been in this industry for over 30 years. The number of articles, ebooks, papers, workshops that I have even delivered on marketing and sales alignment. Why is it so difficult? And we have a whole host of reasons. And when you look at the 9 that are here, there's probably a whole lot more in your organization. But I want to try to simplify this whole idea of alignment. And I want to talk about 3 key things of how you can drive alignment in your organization. Now, some of you may be saying, yeah, but my leadership doesn't really have interest in alignment or investing in this or even talking about it. Well, I hope you take this slide, and if you screenshot it right now, I won't be upset, and use this for your leadership and say, this is why we need to drive alignment in our organization, because at the end of the day, it leads to growth. And there is a host of good data out there and good research that shows if you go ahead and drive towards alignment, and we're going to discuss that it will lead to growth and you will outpace your competition. So how do we make the complex simple? And that's part of what we do here at Digital Exhaust, is really trying to say, let's break down some of the complexity and let's just focus on some things, some key building blocks that we can put in place to make things simple. And the same goes with alignment. And so there's 3 critical elements that we have to think about when we talk about sales and marketing alignment. Number 1, it's a shared view of your customer and their journey. So many organizations focus only in on the buying process, and we're going to dissect that a little bit. But understand that the customer journey is a long journey. It starts with brand and all that leads, hopefully, into customer advocacy. And so we have to understand every stage of that journey, and we're going to break that up. Number 2, an aligned process and an enabling data and tech stack. Data is one of those things that is so crucial to the success of our organizations, yet oftentimes and unfortunately gets the least amount of investment. And then number three, a shared set of KPIs or a shared set of metrics. Now, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to spend most of this webinar talking about the first element because I think it's so crucial that as an organization, if you're going to align, you have to align around your customer. That doesn't mean that 2 and 3 are unimportant, but if you leave out number 1 and you're not focused on your customer, that alignment will remain elusive. So let's take a look at our customers. And here's a few things to remember about your customer. Only about 3 to 5% of your customers in B2B are in the market for a solution. That stat is kind of alarming. Only 3 to 5% of your total addressable market, or your total, even more importantly, total relevant market, is in an active buying mode. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we should have a focus on our brand. We also need to know that up to 70% of that journey is self-guided. We do not need to, as customers, as buyers, I don't need a sales rep to guide me through that process. And so there's some research out there that you can look at that states how that journey is so self-guided, and much of it is anonymous, where a buyer or a potential customer will not reveal themselves until such point they've also created a short list. And so if you get contacted, you know, okay, at least I'm on the short list, but we still have some work to do. We also know that status quo is the competition. And there's about a 40 to 60% of deals are lost to status quo, not necessarily to a competition. So your biggest
Carlos,
competition, yes, go
oh,
ahead, Tim.
so sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to bring up a quick question from
Sure.
Carrie.
Yeah.
Would B2C kind of look similar to these numbers?
You know, I don't, I think they are similar. I don't have the exact B2C data to map this back to. And again, it depends on what you're talking about in terms of B2C. So much of B is transactional and just conducted online. So I can, you know, I can go to Amazon and do a purchase. I mean, even now we can purchase cars online. So it wouldn't probably necessarily, especially when we get down into what I just showed there, the increased number of stakeholders. You're probably not going to have 7 to 9 stakeholders involved in purchasing a car, or even purchasing a home. If you're purchasing a home, there's a single home buyer or a couple that's going to be involved in that process. So they probably would vary a little bit differently, but in terms of the purchase journey being self-guided, absolutely. On B2C, though, what you have to understand is the #1 branded search engine is actually Amazon. It's not Google. So understanding some of those differentiations is really key.
Wow, interesting. Thank you so much.
Of course. And then lastly, I think especially in B2B and sometimes in B2C, because I think some brands get this wrong, we have to understand that our customers are human beings. They feel, they emote, they have good days, they have bad days. You know, they're late, they're frustrated of having to sit in traffic if you have to return to the office. They have things going on in their personal lives. So I really think one of the things we can do the most in terms of driving that engagement with our customers and understanding our customers is understanding that they're human beings and how we can relate to that. Don't get overwhelmed by this slide. I'm not going to read every word. I'm not going to read any of the words, but this really begins with a shared understanding of your customer. And so I've seen a lot of personas in my career. And oftentimes what happens is marketing and sales get together, or marketing gets together, creates this persona, fills it out. Sometimes it's detailed like this. Sometimes it's not so detailed. And they declare that this is our ideal customer. And one of the things you have to understand is that that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you're going to really understand your customer and you're in marketing, you need to align with sales. And this is one of the keys to alignment, is asking sales, what are you seeing from our customers? What are you seeing from our buyers? Who's involved in this process? What's important to them? What are their major challenges? Take that information from sales and then go ask the same questions of your customers. And this is not a point in time moment. This is an ongoing discussion, because this view of your customer may change. There may be competitive pressures. There may be regulations in the market. Any number of factors can impact your customers. And so having marketing and sales do this together with an outside in perspective, customer first, into the organization, and then using your data is going to be really important. So once you understand the customer, now we have to understand the journey. Now, In the previous slide, I showed that up to 7 to 9 potential different stakeholders in a journey. So you may be sitting there saying, how on earth am I going to map 7 to 9 individuals and their journey across, first of all, the initial buying cycle, and then that number could expand and even change in terms of who's involved at the role level once they become a customer. And so this is why we've created a macro view that you can use to say there's value creation and then there's value expansion when it comes to the journey. Value creation is all about my the brand and that initial buying process. And then value expansion is what path do they take and how can I respond once they become a customer. So let's take a look at the new customer acquisition. And so this is brand engagement, which is about 95% of your total addressable market. And then also that initial buying process. And this is where a lot of companies focus with their demand generation efforts. And so we have two sides of this coin. We have the customer journey, and then we have the business journey. And remember that key to status quo is so important. And buyers take the strategic journey. They look at market trends and competitive pressures. They have strategic initiatives. And then, boom, something happens where there's a strategic buying trigger and the pain of status quo has become too much. At the same time, we have to align to this from an organizational perspective and look at this from an operational point of view. And so start to map to that from an operational buying trigger. So we have to be prepared to respond to both. And so what we do is break down this buying journey into some succinct stages. As I mentioned, 40 to 60% of deals are lost to no decision or status quo. And the way you break a buyer out of that and kind of shake them, if you will, is quantify for them the cost of doing nothing, but also just as important, as Matt Dixon talks about in his book, The Jolt Effect, is highlight the benefit of doing something. And if you can do this with your marketing and unite with sales around, let's really understand these problems, you're going to start to drive alignment because together you're breaking this down and helping your customer make the most informed decision they can make. So then you can take an unbiased definition and start to look at solutions and help them move towards a positive change. And then you start to, then at this point, you can drive your solutions from a brand perspective and talk about how you can relieve some of this pain, going back to the cost of doing nothing and the benefit of doing something. And then this is where third-party validation comes in. And lastly, this decision. So again, this is a pretty simple model you can use in your organization to say, let's really understand doing this together with sales, how we can break this down in that value creation stage. And then you bring it all together. And I'm going to go very quickly through this so this makes sense. If you look at understanding awareness, consideration, decision at that top level, and then you see the status quo all the way to decision, I then can now align my roles. This is marketing-led, sales-led, and opportunity management, which is also sales and probably RevOps. You have that layer. So you have clear definitions here on who owns what and then who has to support. Now, in the marketing-led, this doesn't mean sales isn't involved. It just means that marketing is leading and sales is supporting. Once we get to that promotion stage, it's the reverse, because that's probably where you're having some of your human-to-human conversations, whether in person, if you're a field salesperson, or on the phone. And then you start to see that technology and data layer underneath that can enable that. One of the biggest things that I believe drives misalignment is the purchase of technology in a silo. And what I mean by that is in a department where you purchase the technology without any understanding of ownership, without any understanding of the customer journey, or without any understanding of the strategy that the technology and data are there to enable. So understand that first, define those ownership points, and then look at the enabling technology. And you see there underneath all of that, we have a digital touch moving into a human touch. But if you can define that initial buying journey, that value creation stage, do this together with sales. And then underneath that, going back one slide, this is where we have our engagement points. And you can start to align content accordingly to that journey. So that's from a value creation. Again, brand and the initial buying process. Now we move into customer engagement, or what I call value expansion. And this for me is the most exciting stage, because we have such an opportunity with our customers where 90% of our customer lifetime value comes after an initial purchase. Now, what's been really interesting in the conversations I've had with VPs and directors and CMOs is it seems like over the last 12 months and even into this year, we're seeing a renewed focus on how do we expand the revenue and expand that customer lifetime value with our customer base. And to me, it's exciting to see. And the nice thing is many of the same principles and the same processes that we use for customer acquisition can be applied to how we effectively market to our customers. And it's in this that we have to go beyond just marketing and sales alignment. I'll get to that in a moment. So we talked about value creation. Now we're here on value expansion. How do we optimize for our customers? How do we truly activate our customers and ultimately get them to become customer advocates? And I'm not just talking about references. I'm talking about a advocate of your brand, an advocate of your solution, a customer that will be very proactive in promoting. We know that word of mouth is so key on the B2B and the B2C side. So it's vitally important that we create these advocates who will speak about our brand. I think of a few brands that I'm absolutely an advocate for. Apple is one advocate. If you're a Samsung guy or a Samsung lady, I apologize, but Apple is one. REI, the outdoor store, is another. And then Costco is a third. I am an absolute advocate for these brands. And why is that? It's because the journey that I've taken with these brands over the years has been consistent. It has been helpful. It has been at times entertaining. And so I also get the value that I expect for my money. And so when you get a customer who can become an advocate, it's something that you should really treasure and not abuse, but take advantage of it in a good way and put them in front of some other customers. So much like we did with value creation and value expansion, we're trying to simplify so that it can be implemented in your organization. So we have this post-sale experience, then we get to upsell, cross-sell, and renewal, and then we get to loyalty and advocacy. Now, one of the things that organizations often do that I've seen, which is a really bad customer experience, is we get to that cross-sell and upsell way too fast. It's kind of like, hey, they said I do, they bought something, and then within 2 weeks, we're automatically sending them emails about upgrades. And this happens a lot on the consumer side as well, is I get an email of, hey, now that you bought this, now you need to buy this, or upgrade here, or here's your discount coupon. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. I just spent some money with you. I'm a human being. Let's not forget that. I have some buyer's remorse, maybe, especially if it's a big ticket item, either on the B2C or the B2B side. So what we want to focus on is a post-sales experience. How do we onboard and get that customer to get the most out of the solution or service that they just purchased? I just signed up for a application for our business a couple of weeks ago. In the first week, I got over 9 emails from that vendor. Actually, not in the first week. That was in the first 5 days. And it was ridiculous. I read the first one and then the second and the third and the fourth, and it was all about an upsell. And what I really would have loved is a thank you for becoming our customer. Here's what you can expect from us. And then maybe a tip sheet, how to get the most out of this solution. The other thing you may want to consider is thank you for becoming our customer. So that we don't clog your inbox, could you just take a moment to fill out this form so we can communicate to you based on your preferences? And so a preference center is another great way to drive alignment around the customer. And so the other last thing that I'll comment on is that onboarding experience is often crucial in if you're going to retain that customer or not. And if your customer retention scores are low, or your rates are low, and low should be, if you're not in the 90 percentile in terms of customer retention, you might want to look at what are we doing immediately post-purchase to make that first stage of that new customer journey that much more effective for our customers. And so when we think about this customer engagement methodology, we actually like this hype cycle that Gartner has produced, starting with buying trigger all the way to plateau of productivity. But you can see here that what we have done is we've kind of put some things in place of how do you drive and help really reassure the customer that they made the right choice for you or with you as a brand. And again, this isn't just marketing working in a silo. This is marketing sitting down with sales. And we're going to look at the importance of also aligning with customer success or customer service to help drive this engagement. And so understanding that, and I would encourage you to take this and apply this to your customer base by segment. Do not, if you're especially in the B2B space, there's the likelihood that you have multiple audience segments, whether it's product aligned or product segmented or audience size segments. Sometimes it's geo, but apply this to all of your segments and say, how are we doing here? How are we taking our customer base and really understanding where they're at? And how are we driving this engagement? And then getting sales and marketing together with service to sit down and understand the totality of that journey. So much like we had in the value creation, now we have the value expansion. Again, post-sale, upsell, loyalty, and advocacy. And this is where we have to go beyond just marketing and sales alignment that I talked about just a moment ago. It's really about customer success aligning with marketing and sales. And I've seen all kinds of different organizational structures where once they become a customer, they go to account management, or sales retains that for a certain period of time, or sales drives the entire journey. Maybe you're in a named account structure where your top accounts are named accounts and you have an account owner with a pod. The reality is, however your organization is set up, you need to align across marketing, sales, and customer success. And again, if you use this model to say, let's simplify and understand that journey, let's define who's going to own what stage, who's going to support, what data and technology do we need to enable that interaction. This is going to help bring your two organizations together, or your two departments together. And for the customer piece, the three departments of marketing, sales, and customer success. And once you have this full defined journey and everybody agrees to it, now you can use data to say, what is shifting? What is changing? We see a lot of organizations starting to adopt customer data platforms. You've probably seen articles about CDPs, where it gives you the ability to look at the totality of that journey. So again, this isn't a one and done type of exercise. This should be ongoing. And I would say at a minimum, make this a quarterly cadence where marketing, sales, and success come together and say, is this journey still accurate? What has changed? What content do we need? And then bring that to life, and you'll start to see alignment in your organization just over having that common view of the customer and their journey. So let's understand now that we have a very simplistic view, or an easy view, I'll dare say, of our customers and how they move through that journey. Let's take a look at the process piece. And to me, this is foundational to really bringing together marketing, sales, and service. Sometimes what I hear when we talk about process with our clients is, well, I don't want marketing looking over my shoulder. I don't want sales looking over our shoulder. The reality is nobody's looking over anybody's shoulder. What we're trying to do is unite these organizations who have different roles, but all the same goal in terms of growth and revenue and delivering customer experience. And so even if you have that common view of the customer, which I would submit is the most important, you still have to have a defined process. So what I would recommend is start with this foundation. is a lead or an account qualification model. And so in most instances, there'll be one model. If you're a lead-based organization, make it a lead focused model. If you're account-based, maybe you do both depending on the segment, but have that model. And what does that mean? Define the different stages, much like I showed in terms of that journey. Define those different stages and document those stages. Now, again, I want to caution, this isn't marketing going away into a room by themselves or sales doing this or RevOps doing this. This is these groups doing this together in a room. It can be painstaking, but it can be worth it. I remember one time I met with a client and the VP of marketing showed me these listed definitions, the documentation. We looked through it and I asked him, first question, I said, how does sales feel about this? Totally on board was the answer. Well, then I met with the vice president of sales and I said, well, you're off to a great start in terms of defining the stages of your account or lead qualification. And he kind of shook his head. He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never seen any definitions. So clearly there was some misalignment. Then comes into lead and account scoring. When are they actually qualified to talk to an SDR, BDR, or a field rep or an inside rep? The last thing we want to do is pass a just automated lead over to sales. And I still see many organizations is the minute you fill out a form, if you're gating your content, and that's a whole other webinar, but if you're gating your content, I fill out a form to acquire an ebook and I am bombarded by a BDR message. Doesn't mean I'm qualified at that point, just simply means that I downloaded content. And so using, again, that journey, that's why it's so important to utilize that journey, because that should help inform your lead or account scoring model. Then we want to have a handshake between the two agreements. What processes and SLAs and business rules do we need to define to bring these two organizations together? And then what alerts do we have? And then what are these engagement model programs? What do these programs look like? You'll hear me use the word program instead of campaign. You should be looking at an always on program. So no matter where your potential customer or your current customer is in their journey, they can engage with you. So understanding that process, as I showed in that model, and aligning it to that journey is going to be critical. And then having regular check-ins. So documenting all of this. And then again, having regular, I would say at a minimum quarterly, ideally monthly, where you're meeting to analyze, look at the data and saying, do we need to change any of these models? Do we need to update any of these SLAs to make them more realistic? And then how do we use our technology to manage those SLAs and manage this process? So when we think about lead management best practices, this is just a visual of a scoring model that a client of ours used. They are in a lead-based approach, not so much an account-based approach. This is kind of a hybrid B2B, B2C audience. So that's why they're more on that lead-based model than the account-based model. But this was done through a one-day interaction with marketing, sales, and operations, where we went through the definitions, we went through the actions, we went through the demographic, the firmographic, and the behavioral pieces to make sure that everybody is aligned around this. And this is what was then developed in their technology. So wrapping up here, I'm going to get into common measurements and the summary, and then we'll get to questions because I've seen some come through here as I've been presenting. So aligning on common measurements. And ultimately, what we are after is what is our contribution? Excuse me. What is our contribution to pipeline? What does that look like? And so what is marketing contributing? What is sales contributing? And so if you look at, say, I only can do one measurement. We maybe don't have the technology. We're not that advanced. What should I be looking at? What is the impact to the pipeline? And then what is the impact to the revenue? Then we can get a little bit more detailed into what was sourced versus influence. And then as we grow in maturity, we can look at our campaign performance, our program performance, new logo acquisition, value creation versus customer expansion, value expansion, our cross-sell, our upsell, our retention. And then when we get even more advanced, we can look at deal velocity. We can look at the service level agreements that we've created. and how those should be monitored, and should we be changing the business rules that underpin those SLAs. And then program benchmarking is how are we improving over time to drive more growth in our organizations. So 3 takeaways. I told you at the beginning I was going to spend most of my time on the customer journey and understanding your customer, because I think that is the linchpin of all of this. Even if you have a great process, if you have great metrics, if you do not understand your customers and how they interact with you at the brand level, especially through their initial purchase, and then after that to maximize customer lifetime value, you're going to struggle. So the 3 takeaways, as I mentioned, that simplest piece begins with your customer. And I would say if you're going to take anything away from this, is go out, talk to your customers. If you're in marketing, sit down with sales. If you're in sales, bring your marketing people and say, we have to form an outside in perspective of who our customers are and how they move through that journey. Secondly, define, document, and optimize your process. Process development is not a one and done. I would encourage you, if you have a rev ops or marketing ops and sales ops role, that you bring them to the table, even maybe let them lead this process perspective, because they're going to be the ones that really have to make that work, and then monitor it and optimize it accordingly. And then number 3, have a single set of shared metrics that you can use, that you sit down with. So let me tell you how this works. A number of years ago, actually quite a few years ago, before we had all of this burgeoning technology, I was part of a marketing organization. Well, I was part of a software organization, and I led marketing in that organization. My very first day of at the company was sales kickoff, which was very exciting for me. And I've told this story before, so if you're on the webinar and you're like, I've heard this story, my apologies. But I heard from sales in no uncertain terms, they were very direct, that said, marketing has never done anything for us, and we do not expect you to do anything different. Not a real welcoming way to come into a company. So what I did is I spent a week and I started to do some research, and I looked at the data, and I found out that they were right. Now, I couldn't control history, but I could control what happened at that point. So I went to sales. I said, I've looked at the data and you're right. I said, so I want to change that, but I'm going to need your help to change it. In essence, help me help you. And so we sat down, and I said, one of the first things that we need to do is I've got to be able to talk to customers live. So I started to go on sales calls, started to set up calls with customers. And I probably met with about 30 of our customers. Once we had a shared view, I started to interview those salespeople and said, hey, this is what we're seeing from a customer perspective. What are you seeing? Not like, hey, is this right? But I wanted to get their perspective. We did the same with service. From there, we put together a program. Long story short, a year later at sales kickoff, the vice president who had told me he expected nothing more from marketing stood up in front of the entire organization, put his hands over his heart, looked at our marketing team and said, marketing, you've won my heart. At that point, we started to be invited to QBRs during the year. We had shared set of metrics. Sales was popping into our offices or sending us emails saying, hey, we just got this deal, marketing sourced this, thanks for the support. It totally changed the tone and tenor of what happened in that organization. But it started with a shared view of our customer, and it started with marketing reaching out to our team, reaching out to sales saying, you're right, how can we work together? And if you're in that spot, I would encourage you to go to sales and ask the same, and sales do the same with marketing, or support do the same, customer support do the same with marketing. So I would love to continue a conversation, and my goal is to help as many organizations really crack the code on alignment. And hopefully I've provided you with some details on how you can make this more simple in your organization, 3 things to focus on, and a process on which you can follow. There's my email address for you. If you scan that QR code, and I believe Tara's going to put my link in the chat, you can book some time with me. It links right to my calendar. So please don't be afraid to do that. Really, our whole view is growth. And when the industry grows, we all get better. And ultimately, it will be better for your customers, and it will provide them a better experience. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Tara. I think we've had a lot of questions come in. I know I answered the one about B2C, but Tara, I'll turn it back to you. I think we've probably got about 15, 20 minutes in terms of questions, which is great. It's the thing that I love the most. And so please do not be shy, pipe in and let the questions fly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carlos. So informative. Before we dive into our questions, I just want to remind everyone that, yeah, now is the time to get straight from the source insight. And great questions again make for a great webinar. So don't forget to submit yours if you have any. And additionally, we understand if you need to run, just know that today's session is being recorded and will be emailed to you within the next 48 hours. And if we don't get to your question or comment today, yes, you can always connect with Carlos via the channels on screen. And I am going to drop those links in the chat as well, in case you weren't able to scan the code and his LinkedIn and all of that. So that'll go right in the chat. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's dive into some questions. We got, yeah, some great questions. Let's start with one from Jim. He's asking, he's saying the concept of the cost of doing nothing is often cited. How would you calculate this?
Yeah, I think that's going to be dependent on your industry, dependent on your product, dependent on your service. What I would do is if you don't have quantitative evidence based on your customers, is oftentimes there'll be industry research that you can use to make that point. So I'm thinking of one client right now. I'm not going to divulge a whole lot, but they have a solution that they have across their customer base been able to show that on average, they can improve their clients' efficiency by 50% at a minimum, on average. They can also help improve cash flow at a significant rate. Now, that wasn't just like pie in the sky, let's grab it. They started to take a look at the customer base and the performance of that. If you don't have that ability, then I would look at industry research. If you don't have industry research, then go to some qualitative evidence. And this is where having customers, having the voice of the customer. So go out and start to interview customers and ask them what the benefits have been versus had they stayed in the status quo, and use some of those qualitative statements to make your point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Carlos. And if there are any follow-ups to anything we get to chatting about in the Q&A, feel free to share those as well. Next question is coming in from Misty, and I've seen this come in a couple of times actually. Any advice, any strategies, when it comes to getting buy-in from leadership, and when it comes to investing in sales and marketing alignment?
Yeah, great question. I would encourage you to go back to, I know that you're going to have this presentation, but I would encourage you to go out and use that slide. I think it was slide 4. Don't quote me on that. Just on that research. Some of the feedback that you may get from leadership, and I'm just using this based on experience, is it's going to be too disruptive. So at that point, then say, well, can then we run a pilot and find 1 or 2 reps on the sales side, or a regional director, or I don't know how big your organization is, that will say, hey, we will align and do this across the journey. And then say, if we do that pilot and align just at that real micro level, can we then measure performance of how much pipeline is being contributed, and then the sales close rates and the revenue from that sales pod or that marketing and sales pod? Try that, because I think sometimes what leadership, first of all, there's competing priorities, but I think leadership is afraid of disruption, which, we could debate that. I think it's more disruptive to not have alignment. So I would try that, and then start to use, again, outside sources and say, hey, it's not just me saying this. These are experts in this field in B2B or B2C who are saying that alignment is paramount. And if you really want to drive growth, it's one of the key ways we can do that.
Thank you, Carlos. Moving right along, question coming in from Daniel. Would you say that these methods and these strategies could apply universally to any kind of target audience, or is there something more specific?
Yeah, I haven't seen an audience yet where they don't apply. Now, one of the things you have to understand is even in B2B, sometimes you have real transactional buying processes. And so we have some customers where their buying, the initial buying cycle is less than 30 days. So, but you can still look at status quote to decision as a potential methodology that you can use and adapt to your unique circumstances. We also have clients who have 18-month initial buying cycles. So that process just becomes longer. So understanding that time frame and then applying it there. But even on a transactional or an e-commerce type of purchase, you can still utilize that. And again, it's important to understand is that 70% of that on average in the B2B space of that journey is going to be done anonymously. So that should really put an emphasis on what are you doing from a brand perspective and how are you helping educate and inform your audience so that when something does happen, your brand pops to mind and they say, you know what, we've been engaging with their content. This is an organization we can trust.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Thank you all for the great questions coming in. Again, moving along here, Misty has a follow up. Any suggestions related to managing multiple buyer journeys? She serves 3 to 4 segments that don't typically overlap in pain points or personas, etc.
Yeah, and we see that often in organizations. Unfortunately, there's not a one size fits all in terms of that journey. But if you use what I would encourage you to is to use the models that we provided there and say, okay, for each of those, how does that work? Now, there's only so many hours in the day that you can utilize. So I would start with the segment that is providing the most revenue. So we have a couple of clients right now in the enterprise space. And if you look at the different business units and the disparity in terms of revenue, starting with that top line revenue one, that this is bringing in the most revenue at the highest margin, start there, and then you can replicate. But again, using the models that I presented, I would hope that would make it a little bit more simple for you rather than trying to detail every one of those touch points. But if there's such a difference between those audience segments, how they behave, their challenges, pain points, et cetera, you would have to look at all of those different segments and define those journeys appropriately, which would also impact your score model potentially on that process side.
Thank you, Carlos. And we have a question coming in from Warren that's a bit of a follow up to your response about kind of getting that executive buy in. Um, he is saying that his executive team really has, a high focus on sales. Sales brings in the revenue. Seems to be kind of a sales led culture. How can he kind of flip the script?
Yeah, it's I sit on both sides because I sell a lot. I love selling, but I also do a lot of marketing, and I love marketing. So it's fortunate. I think sitting down and first of all talking to sales, really do a diagnostic. Are we providing the best quality opportunities? Looking at your retention scores, looking at are we expanding customer lifetime value once they become a customer? So looking at both the value expansion piece and the value creation and that value expansion piece, and then use the data to say, hey, look, this is great. We're sales led. So then speak their language instead of trying to push against being sales led. Say, if we align, we can support the sales led culture even more. We can drive more pipeline. We can drive more revenue. We can drive more growth. So I wouldn't necessarily try to push back against that culture per se, but use the culture in a way to your benefit that then brings the data. You can bring the data in to show how that sales-led culture will perform at a higher level. And then I say this with all sincerity, if the executives just say, hey, marketing, sales is your customer, and that's never going to change, and they're not going to put anything from an investment in terms of alignment, et cetera, and I say this with all sincerity, I would encourage you to maybe look for a different spot. And I've told this to every marketer I've ever worked with. I would help you do that in my capabilities and my network, because I think life's too short to be in a role where marketing isn't appreciated for the role that they should play in growth.
It's so important. I have seen a few comments come in that says, they just want people to recognize the value that marketing brings to the table.
Sure.
Marketers wear many hats. They play a lot of different roles, and yeah, people definitely seems to be something on top of mind with the people here today.
Yeah, it's the downside of marketing. Everybody thinks they can do marketing.
Yeah. Oh, that is not the case, is it? We know. Um, okay, great. Our next question coming in from Aracel. Um, what are your thoughts on a small e-commerce business who only has a marketing team? Do you think they need a sales manager, or what would be the most ideal to generate growth?
Yeah, I think in that case, if you're 100% e-commerce, eventually you may say, "Hey, we're going to bring in some salespeople, whether it's inside or field or a BDR role." If it's 100% e-commerce, then really focus in on that first pillar that I talked about: is understanding your customer, understanding the journey, understanding their challenges, understanding what their status quo is, and then what's their cost of doing nothing versus the benefit of doing something. So really spend and invest in that deep understanding and generating those customer insights, and then driving them ultimately to that point of purchase on the e-commerce platform. I think the process will be important, but more so is what happens if they get to the platform and then they abandon their cart or they abandon the platform altogether. What's that back end process that we want to utilize to re-engage them in a meaningful way and help them make that purchase in an informed way? And then I'm not sure what that support structure is, but that's where you may want to align with support around process, if they have support calls or service calls, or a customer success team, something like that.
Perfect. Thank you. Um, Next question coming in from Barry. What is the biggest mistake you see when companies are trying to improve sales and marketing alignment? What is the number one biggest mistake they can make during that process?
I think the biggest mistake that I see over, well, there's two that I see over and over, is they don't speak to their customers when they're developing their shared view of the customer. So it's marketing and sales together, which is great, but then they create it from their perspective. And that's why I kept talking about outside in. What I mean is starting with the customer information and then bringing that into and saying, okay, we now have the customer's perspective. What is sales and marketing perspective? But I've literally walked through personas when I ask, how is this done? Well, we sat with our sales team and we just did this in a day or half a day working session and we created this, which is a start. But again, it often becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. What do I want my customer to be versus who they actually are? So that's number one. Number two is a negligence in terms of data integrity and not really understanding, is the data that I have on my customer legitimate? Is it, when's the last time we've looked at it? Who's tending it? Who's making sure that the integrity is there? And so data is such an important thing that has to be invested in. And so if you don't have the right data, it's going to be hard to pull those insights out of it.
Totally, absolutely. Um, and following that up, we have an attendee asking, what questions should we ask the customer to gain, the best understanding of their perspective on these things? Are there any kind of go-to questions that you recommend?
Oh, I love that question. Whoever asks it gets the gold star for today. Um, I think asking them questions instead of saying, "What do you like about us?" Right? What are they going to say at that point? Nothing. Um, Ask them, say, "So what were the events or what were the circumstances by which you started your purchase process?" So that is a gold mine because that can help inform your content. Understanding that what Google calls the zero moment of truth, that we in my graphic talked about the trigger event. Another question is, what channels did you use? to collect your information? Who was involved on your side throughout that purchase journey? Those are three on the value creation side. And then so I'll give you the fourth. What were the pain points or challenges you were trying to solve for? And what was important about solving those? On the customer side is who's involved in the solution or service that you purchased from us? What could we do better in terms of onboarding and adoption? What is the approach that you're taking to maximizing the value of your purchase? Is the expectation that you had does that meet what we've provided? What could we do better? What is the journey that you're now taking with us as a brand now that you've purchased our product? And what does that look like? So having all of that insight is going to be invaluable, because not only is it going to help you inform that journey and the different stages or milestones, it really is, as I mentioned earlier, key to the content that you can develop to start to engage with them, whether it's digital or whether it's in a human to human form.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And with that gold star question and that gold star answer, that is just about all the time we have for today. I hope you all learned half as much as I did. And before we go, speaking of asking questions, I would like to encourage you to participate in the survey that will pop up in your browser after this webinar. This feedback, of course, helps us continue to produce webinars that you enjoy and you find value in, just like this one. Thanks again to our sponsor, ZoomInfo. And Carlos, a big special thank you to you for such an incredible and valuable presentation and taking the time to answer our questions today.
Well, thank you, Tara. It's a pleasure to be here. And again, thanks to ZoomInfo and Sales Pro Central. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for attending today. Again, my name is Tara, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Take care.